Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Peter Meyers and I'm here more as a data professional than a developer, which is perhaps a little unusual for a conference like this. In fairness, I was a developer many years ago. I recall .NET going into release and working on ASP.NET in those days. But primarily my role is as a data consultant, whether that's working with operational systems or more likely I work with analytic systems, whether they're large-scale data warehouses or small-scale self-service BI solutions that could be developed in Excel or with the product that I'm about to talk about today, which is Microsoft's Power BI. Now, what I might do in a room like this is actually poll. Has anybody worked with Power BI before? But before you indicate that, what I would like to do is poll you by using the very technology that we're going to talk about. So could I ask you to just take a quick minute, either use the QR code or use the tiny URL. There are 5 questions that describe something about yourself, including any background you might have with Power BI. The results will come up near real time into a dashboard, and we're going to talk about how these dashboards can be developed as part of this session. Be as honest as you care to be. Okay, we have the first one in. So when you click submit, glance up. Within less than a second, you should see the result integrated within this summarized view. So what you're looking at here is a Power BI dashboard. Now, a step backwards, when we talk about Power BI, it is a service from Microsoft that is about data visualization. Now, to be super clear, there's a cloud service, which is what mostly we talk about when we talk about Power BI, but there's also the Power BI report server on premises. Today, this topic is not in scope. I am talking about the Power BI service. The Power BI service delivers data visualizations, and it does so in 2 different ways, either through dashboards or through reports. And we'll talk about both in some detail. But I noticed from the results coming in that the Power BI experience shows me that there are at least one or several people that have minimal background to Power BI. So it's important that we begin with an understanding of what the service is. That single sentence, it's about data visualization. It can deliver this through dashboards, which deliver up-to-date results truly in summarized format. So think about the origin of the word dashboard is that as a driver of a car, you don't want to be distracted by unnecessary detail. You just need what are the facts that are relevant to safely arriving at my destination. How fast am I going? Do I have sufficient fuel? And if I don't have sufficient fuel, please alert me to take some sort of action. That's what dashboards are about. But what you then might find is, well, I need to dig deeper into the data. So by clicking on the tile of a dashboard, it navigates to the second type of visualization experience, which is the report. So if I was to describe dashboards versus reports in Power BI, I would say that the dashboard is there to monitor a much more passive experience, and the report is there for interaction. I want to explore and understand deeper meaning. For example, of the younger group in the room, what is their experience? And we can see a cross-filter take place on the report. And users love this type of experience. It lets them answer an array of questions. Now, switching back to the dashboard, we might also use capabilities like ad hoc questions. You know, if we zoom in and look at the Power BI experience here, would anybody hazard a guess as to what the average self-rating for Power BI is? What's a guess based on what you see here? 3 to 4. Somewhere between 3 and 4. And yet what we could do in a dashboard is simply use a question. So ask the question, what is the average Power BI experience? Pretty good, 3.72. Now, if that's a recurring question, as a developer of the dashboard, we might pin this back as a new tile, and then we could continue to monitor that real time as the results come in. All right, so as an introduction for those that don't have experience with Power BI, the data visualization service, it's about delivering data to your decision makers. So when it comes to what data does it connect to, I would suggest any modern data source, whether it's cloud-based, whether it's on-premises. Power BI has the ability to represent through dashboards and reports. As far as delivery, there's a native mobile application for iOS, for Android, even Apple Watch. So when it comes to delivering these dashboards, it's relatively straightforward. And that, in a nutshell, is what this service is designed to deliver, and yet I could spend a whole week going through everything in detail. What I think matters in this hour is what can you, as a developer, achieve with this service. So I'm happy to see that, by role, the majority of people here are software developers, because this is who I'm speaking to. As a software developer, you have the capability to embed this content into your own applications. You might decide that the visualizations that are being used are not as spiffy or as custom as you would like for your reports and dashboards. So you can develop, especially web developers working with web graphics, they can develop their own even animated visuals within Power BI. And as evidence of the poll that I just took, real-time delivery. And that's also a developer task. So these are the topics that we're going to explore in this hour. Alrighty, so on track with the presentation, my name is Peter Meyers. I come from Melbourne. I've been a data platform MVP with Microsoft for over 12 years, and I work very closely with Microsoft in the Power BI and data analytics area. I'm very fortunate to build a lot of the content, as in labs and presentation content that they use internally or they use with their partners. So that gives me a very good communication channel with the engineering group to actually know what's coming, why you've developed this, how do we need to communicate this out to other people. Now, as part of that, I built a one-day developer course for Microsoft. It's called Power BI Developer in a Day, and it runs around the world in different locations, and of which tomorrow, and I'll remind you at the end of this session, I'll be delivering 3 workshops tomorrow of an hour each, that if you choose to bring your laptop, you can create a custom visual, develop a real-time dashboard, or embed Power BI content into an app. I'll remind you about that at the end of the session. So I think I've already given you that overview. Power BI, new generation of business intelligence, essentially it's BI as a service. Now, often when we talk about it, it's software as a service, but for you as developers, when you go to embed your content, it will become platform as a service. Lots of challenges in delivering BI, ultimately delivering the right data to the right people, and this is a service that from the ground up has been designed to achieve that. So there is much more to discuss on how it achieves it. We won't go through the mechanics today of how we expose our data, how we model it, how we might enrich it with business calculation, how we might secure it for different users to see different data, and how we might design and develop those reports and dashboards. We're going to take the approach that that's already happened, and as a developer, we want to enhance, embed, or extend it. All right, this diagram pretty much puts it all together. The yellow box simply says it doesn't matter where your data comes from, whether it's on-premises, whether it's software as a service, whether it's cloud resources, and that you have the ability to produce these amazing solutions. What I will point out in the bottom right corner, highly relevant to you guys as developers, is there is a REST API. That once you authenticate with the service, there are a number of functions that are supported, and in fact, the real-time dashboard was achieved through a programmatic push of data into a Power BI data set. All right, so it doesn't matter where you come from, what you do. Generally, when we talk about Power BI, we're talking to business analysts. You see, the strongest story of Power BI is often the self-service business intelligence. So from a Microsoft perspective, that used to be Excel. And while Excel is still a very strong, robust, and flexible tool for producing these types of solutions, we now have a dedicated tool called Power BI Desktop. And as a free download, it is really a modeling and reporting tool. And so most of the time when you see Power BI topics, they're really focused on the business user, business analyst producing self-service solutions. So without a focus on them right now, and with a focus on the topic of what can you as a software developer do, well, you can build real-time dashboards. If you're not happy with the visualizations that come with the Power BI service or the custom visuals that are publicly available through the Microsoft Marketplace, you can go ahead and develop what you need. If you need to connect to data that isn't directly supported by Power BI, there's also a framework to connect to perhaps legacy or custom data stores that you have. And then perhaps the biggest topic, especially for ISVs, is how can I take that amazing report or dashboard and embed it seamlessly into my application? We'll explore all of those today. Now, up front, a brief discussion about licensing, that there are 3 different licenses for Power BI. There's the Power BI free license, which, as its name suggests, it doesn't cost any money, but it will be quite limited when it comes to doing anything like sharing that content with others. So it's a great starting point if you're new to Power BI and your organization hasn't yet adopted it and bought licenses, is that you can just sign up, typically with an organizational account, and then you can start producing solutions. What you will require at some stage is a pro license. Typically authors require this, and that enables them to publish and share and work within the concept of an app workspace, and I'll talk about them later. So at minimum, authors will need this, and it goes for around US $10 per month per user. The concept of Power BI Premium is actually a tenant level license. It's not a per user license, and it's the purchase of capacity, basically, that in the data center, that hardware is yours. And what it opens up is scale and performance, and it also opens up advanced features that are coming from Microsoft and the opportunity when sharing content that if your content is on a premium capacity, you can share to as many free users, internal or external from the organization. So I don't want to go into licensing in much more detail except to say that is an introduction, and I'll refer back to it when I talk about the other topics in this session. One last point is, and especially for developers, that if you're evaluating Power BI and you don't want to commit to a yearly premium license, Azure will provide the Power BI embedded resource. So this allows you to spin up and even pause a resource for as little as $1 an hour. So from a development point of view, you can build an environment that doesn't commit you to the licenses. And once you've got a sign off that the project is getting traction and adoption and it's successful, then you can consider the Power BI licenses. All right, so Azure is an ideal, the A1 SKU, for you guys as developers that just want a cheap way to get started. All right, so I'm not going to go through licensing in much more detail, but I will share a QR code at the end of this session. You're welcome to download the PDF of everything that you see in this presentation. So I think we really need to make a start and see the topics and let me demo what you guys can achieve. So when it comes to developing with Power BI, I've mentioned there are really 5 main opportunities. Work with the REST API to integrate Power BI experiences into your apps. Integrate Azure services. So for IoT scenarios, if you want real-time dashboards, Stream Analytics from Azure works beautifully. And we're seeing closer relationships with other Azure data services. The ability to develop custom visuals, custom connectors, and then perhaps the biggest topic is the embedded analytics. All right, so let's start with the Power BI REST API. There's a growing set of functionality. It looks like Microsoft are heading in the direction that anything that their portal will let you do, ultimately they'll expose functionality through the REST API that lets you do that if you want to. So we see examples with some customers that they could go to powerbi.com, which is the experience that you see here, or they would like to build their own experience that allows navigation and use of the content of their own organization. So you could use the REST API for this. The focus that I want in this short session is to show you how you could deliver a real-time dashboard through programmatic push of data. So real-time dashboards, as you've seen at the commencement of this session, allow you to deliver up-to-date values by achieving this with 3 different types of data sets. So this can get a little technical. I'd prefer to have 60 minutes on this topic alone. But the example that you just saw was a push data set, programmatically pushing rows, and the dashboard is responsible for delivering up-to-date data at all times. When the service acknowledges that a push of a row into a table has been made, the dashboard will instantly reflect that. There are other concepts like streaming data sets. So these are much more lightweight. And I will demo both of them to give you an idea of what they're like. And the PubNub streaming, does anyone have any involvement with PubNub? service allowing ingestion of IoT hubs. They have a direct communication with Power BI. So if you're already working with PubNub, Power BI is a simple visualization tool that will directly consume streams from PubNub. Won't demo that one today. Now, when we talk about Power BI, typically it works at an organizational level. If you're familiar with Office 365 and the concept of a tenant, is that Power BI runs within the same tenant. Therefore, authentication happens through Azure Active Directory for your existing accounts. Now, within the tenant, you will have licenses provided to users. They will sign in, and every user has their own personal space known as a workspace, and their content is stored there. That is usually not a recommended place to put production content because it is truly a personal space. What we can create are app workspaces. And as an app workspace, it is a fluid membership that has ownership of it. So it supports collaboration. So you can understand that a team of maybe 5 developers are all members of an app workspace, and they create content like data sets, reports, and dashboards inside here. Now it becomes a deployment concept. The app workspace can then be published to support distribution to thousands of users, all packaged up as a collection of reports and dashboards for consumption through web portals, embedded, or through mobile devices. So what I'm giving you there is, the tenant is enterprise-wide. Within the tenant, we have workspaces. Within workspaces, we have data sets that represent your data. Now that's another deep conversation because it could represent lots of things. It could represent a model that you've imported into the service. It could represent a live connection to an analysis services cube. It could represent a streaming data set. So I'd ask you to think today that a data set really is just a generic definition of how the reports and dashboards retrieve data. All right, it's another discussion how they become. But without a data set, you can't visualize data. So your workspace must have at least one data set representing your data, and then you'll produce reports for those interactive exploration experiences. And if you require monitoring, you'll pin the visuals of reports up to a dashboard to deliver real-time updates to your users. With a focus on the data set then, structurally, they are a collection of tables. So data sets can be quite complex. We can create models that bring together multiple tables to support the analysis of various subjects. Within a table, as you well understand from relational databases, they have columns and they have rows. All right, so a data set, collection of tables, rows, and columns. All right, in order to work with the REST API, the first thing you're going to need to do is register an application with your Azure Active Directory. You will then delegate permissions as to what the Power BI service is allowed to do with that application. So in demonstration, I shall do this. There is a little tool that Microsoft created called the Register an Application for Power BI. That if you don't want to work with the Azure portal itself, then you can use this URL, sign up with an existing account. It remembers that I've already signed in, so it welcomes me back. Step 2 is that you need to provide your app a name. In this case, it will be a native application. And then I need to provide a redirect URL. And I'll copy and paste from my snippet file. Next, what permissions will my application require? Well, just to ensure the demo doesn't fall over, I'll be super safe. But of course, the principle of least privilege should apply here. Only delegate what the application needs. And step 4, the easiest of all, is simply register the app, and then what we get back is a client ID. That with the Azure AD authentication, you'll be authenticating with the app. You'll see this happen in just a moment. All right, there are actually many more permissions. That registration tool is a little bit old. So you'll see there's a growing number of permissions based on other capabilities and features of the service. Now, when we look at the REST API and common operations, and there's a growing number of these, relevant to us when embedding content or delivering real-time dashboards, are basically operations that will enumerate collections. What are the data sets? Within the data set, what are the tables? What are the dashboards? What are the reports? And so on. With direct relevance to real time, we can create data sets programmatically. We can even modify the schema if later on you need to add a new column to a table. We can push rows to the table. And we can clear all rows from a table. And before the question comes up, there's no such concept of a subset deletion. Unfortunately, you have to clear all rows out. So with my customers, I'll find that there's an off-peak part of the week, maybe Sunday PM. We might just run a clear and reset. For reasons I'll discuss shortly, that there are limits on the volume of data that can be accumulated in the tables. So let's see an example. Request response model. A request is sent to the service. Note the AAD token. That implies that authentication has succeeded. The application has cached a token, and it's in the header of every request sent to the service. So simply enumerate data sets, and then it sends back a JSON document of which your application can parse. So perhaps a drop-down list. What report do you want to view? Enumerate the reports, populate some control. When it comes to inserting a row into a table, this is a post request. And what I'll point out here is that within your data sets, all Power BI content is uniquely identified by a GUID. So the GUID that we see here, 2C0CCF12, is a data set within a workspace. Within its tables collection, we're pushing into the product table, and then we have an array of rows, basically column value pairs. You can push up to 10,000 rows in a single request. All right, so let's see this by example. And the way that I like to demo this is actually based on a lab that I wrote for Microsoft, and it's available publicly. And I just produced a rich client application. This isn't what you would deliver to your end users, but it allows you to explore that REST API. The lab does this so much better, but in this short demonstration, I'll show you how we'll create and push rows to deliver a real-time dashboard. Okay, so I'm simply going to start. Now, in the lab, it says open up options because we need to know what your client ID is. Remember how I just created this? I'm going to copy this, and it goes into the application ID. And then when it comes to the redirect URI, I think I used something different. Now, obviously, you would not expose this to your end user. This would be in a config file. But for the purpose of this lab, this works nicely. And then you need to go ahead and authenticate. So we're now going to be challenged for an account. And if authentication succeeds, note that I'm being asked whether I'm still happy to proceed. You know when you install an app on your phone and it says, oh yeah, I know that this is just an app to track the trams in Melbourne, but it needs access to your photographs. And you're sort of like, yes, but why? And you have the option then to say, well, no, because if I agree to that, it's going to use my permission set to act on my behalf, and who knows what it's doing. All right, so here we see for the very first time, are we okay with all of those permissions? If I accept those, authentication succeeds, a token is retrieved from the service, and the application has simply cached it. It's just a long string. That will be put into the request header of everything we now do. So I'm going to enumerate the workspaces that I have access to, and I see there's one here for NDC Sydney. And then I can explore within it and say, okay, well, what data sets do we have? And there's the survey data set that was used to deliver the real-time dashboard I demoed. But what I'm going to do is create a new data set. And it's simply a matter of passing a JSON document that describes your data set. This one's super simple. Create a data set named e-commerce. In the array of tables, there'll be just one named browsing. In its array of columns, you see here, and I'm sorry, it's not totally clear. And I forgot to install Zoom It. Ow. There are 4 columns: timestamp, product, category, and country, and their data types. All right, so they could be much more complex. There could be multiple tables and relationships and DAX formulas that decide how to aggregate and summarize data. All right, so this is extremely simple, single table, 4 columns. But another decision we can consider is, what is the retention policy? So I'll say to you that when you create what is known as a push data set, there's a maximum storage of 5 million rows per table. When you hit that, you'll just get errors. That will force you at some point to do a clear all rows and continue to accumulate data. You can move to the basic FIFO that says it'll keep approximately 200,000. As you start to insert more rows, it'll drop the older rows out and you will never run out of space. So let's just turn that feature on. Now, before I click OK, let's switch back here and we should see real time that the data set is created, and there it is in the service. We now have an e-commerce data set, and we can see here in the field list that there are the 4 fields for the browsing table. Now, of course, there's no data in there, but if I drag product to the report canvas and I switch it to a visual type that is a card, we get a response that it's blank. In fact, I'll change the summarization to give me the count of products. So this single card here will just tell us the number of rows that have been inserted into the table. I could also create another visual that says, show me category and product as a bar chart. And we'll put product, or rather the counter product, as a value. Okay, it's not very impressive without data, but it is a requirement that we have a report in place before we can create a dashboard. So having saved this report based on a data set with no rows, what I'm going to do then is pin up to a new dashboard that's called e-commerce, and that's the technique typically used to creating a dashboard. If I pin both of these up, pinned it to the wrong one, and then I switch to my e-commerce dashboard, well, there it is. I've assembled a dashboard by first creating a data set, building a report on top of it, saving the report, and then pinning individual visuals to produce real-time tiles on a dashboard. So the fun part then is, what happens if we use this app to push data into the tables? So I use the operation to enumerate tables of the data set, and then I've exposed 2 push data options. Now, essentially you're pushing a JSON document. So the JSON document here that I'll use to push a single row looks like this. An array of rows, maximum 10,000, and then just mapping columns to values. So what happens when I push that single row to the service? There it is, sub-second. So in the app, when I have a capability to event stream, it's just really a wrapper over that. I've allowed the ability in the lab for the lab user to come in and basically say, yeah, I've got some CSV data, so stockpile that. And then to simulate reality, just randomly send between 10 and 20 with no delay. And because I know I have a column called timestamp, put the current UTC, date and time, into that. So if we wanted to do real-time monitoring and plotting, we could do it. And so basically it's just sending a batch of somewhere between 10 and 20 rows up to the service. Really straightforward. For you guys that are web developers or familiar with, request response models, there's not a lot to it. Okay? And that's the approach of using the REST API to deliver a real-time dashboard. The other method there is clear all rows. Instantly, the data's been removed from the data set and the dashboard reflects that. Okay, delivering a real-time dashboard with the Power BI REST API. A variation on that is Azure Stream Analytics, which is designed to ingest and to produce time-based outputs. So it's an IoT story. It has an output that can push to a Power BI data set, and it uses the exact same REST API. It just takes the ingestion and the query output and just sends it as a JSON document to Power BI, and that's how you've got an IoT story with Azure with Power BI. Okay, there are some restrictions, very, very briefly. The ones that really matter are the 5 million rows per table, unless you switch to the basic FIFO mode, which guarantees you won't run out, but you won't have as much history. You can't push more than 10,000 rows in a single request. Maximum rows per hour is 1 million. But the moment that the table has more than 250,000 rows, the ingestion is completely throttled. It won't allow more than 2 a second. All right, so I'm going to regard that while you can have 5 million rows, when you get to 250,000, you're going to hit some row bumps. They're the ones that matter. Now, there is another approach. I've just mentioned Azure, and I won't go through it in more detail. But the other approach is, before I jump too far ahead, this is normally a 2-hour presentation, so I'm just keeping the pace brisk. By the way, Azure Machine Learning can integrate with Azure Stream Analytics to give you real-time predictions to Power BI, those two services in partnership. The topic that I wanted to come to is you have an alternative approach for real-time dashboards. What I've just described to you with the REST API is what's known as a push data set. Programmatically just push, push, push. A more recent variant of a data set is the streaming data set, which allows you to deliver real-time programmatically using a very, very different approach. So let me demonstrate by, first of all, creating a new dashboard. Let's come into the service, create a dashboard, and I'll call this streaming. All right, so empty dashboard. At the very top, I can add a tile. And this special type of tile is known as a custom streaming data tile. Now, in order to work with it, it wants a streaming data set of which I have none defined. So conveniently, I can just click on the yellow button here, and I can create a data set using the portal. They can be programmatically created with the REST API as well. So let's just assume I want to monitor the temperature in the room. So let's create a data set by name temperature. The first field will be the timestamp. We only have 3 data types. So it'll be date time and the temperature itself. Number. So you already see what the payload of a message will need to be. You simply substitute your values to the right-hand side of the colon. If I turn historic analysis on, this data set will be both a streaming data set and a push data set at the same time. The benefit of that is streaming data sets cannot be used by reports. So the rich visualizations that Power BI offers are through reporting. Streaming data sets have a very simple subset of visual capabilities that I'll show you. If you turn on historic, then it's both at the same time, which means you could also use that data set for reporting. All right. Turning it on, well, I'll turn it off because I'm not even going to use it. Clicking create, the data set's created. It should pop up on the left-hand side. Oh, there it is. And then for convenience, we've got a code snippet here for PowerShell that says, all right, if you run this, then you can push data, or you can stream data more technically. So let's just open up PowerShell here and paste that in. All right, so the very first line there is a variable capturing the endpoint. Again, you see the unique identifier for your workspace within its data sets. There's your data set. And interestingly here, key onwards is the authentication requirement. There's no need to authenticate through Azure AD, cache your token. It's all within that variable. Therefore, be careful who you share this with. The payload is just your message of column value pairs. So let's update the temperature to be, we're here in Sydney, so let's assume the room's 22.7, and then it just pushes that payload up to the service. So before I do that, let's go back to the streaming data set and return to add tile, and this time we can add a tile based on that temperature streaming data set. There are the limited visualizations that are supported over streaming data sets, so I'll go for the line chart. I'd like to plot the timestamp on the axes and show the temperature value here. Done. Now we know it's a streaming data set because the little lightning strike, like the Harry Potter of dashboard tiles, that indicates that it's running off a streaming data set. So now if I switch back here, the problem is it's just a point on there. So let's make this a little more interesting. Let's infinite loop. While true, do this. And we'll put in a sleep command as well. So sleep for 1 second. Just keep looping. Instead of just timestamp, why don't we say get date and format this as universal format. And the temperature, just for fun, get a random value. Let's suggest between 19.9 and a maximum of 23.9. Awesome, there it is. Is that challenging for you guys as developers to somehow source data from wherever matters and just push it, in this case, in a streaming fashion? What's notable, if you're familiar with the two different techniques, is the streaming is very fluid. Do you see the way it's just sort of flowing across the tile? Whereas with the REST API, there's a certain sort of jerkiness as it constantly updates. Okay. Another difference here is the data will only ever be cached into the service for 60 minutes. After 60 minutes, it evaporates. Whereas with the push approach, you have control over the retention of any history. Awesome. That was my demo number 2, delivering real time with a different technique being the streaming data sets. Let's move on to a different topic, still relevant to software developers, but I'd be very clear, a very specific subset of developers that they have amazing skills to produce these types of graphics using web technologies. One of my favorite is actually the fish. Let me demonstrate that for you now. It's called the Enlighten Aquarium. So if I return to the survey here, we might decide that this role is just such a classic interpretation. It's verging on boring, right? So the way that we could fix that is come back to the report. As the owner of the report, I can edit it. And I want you to notice where I'm pointing here in the visualizations tray is that I can introduce custom visuals. Now you can import them from a file. The demo here is simply go to the marketplace. And that doesn't look healthy. And search the marketplace for the aquarium. All right, here he is. Read the blurb, look at the license details. Simply by adding, it imports it into the report, and you'll see him pop up here with its own little icon. There he is as a fish. So now I can come to role and switch this visualization to become the aquarium. All right, like if I zoom into him, you'll see that that's the big fish of you guys as software developers, 11 of you. Little black one sitting here is the other of 3. If you don't like fish, well, you could come in here and say, well, I'd rather see sharks. Okay, now, the applicability of this, I'm still waiting for a customer that's a fish and chip shop because that would work awesome, right? But what matters is that you can visualize the data in the way that matters to your customer, to your organization. All right, so that's the story of custom visuals. That's easy. Finding existing visuals is something that the end user is trained to do. For you guys as a developer, you can develop these yourself. You can optionally submit them to Microsoft and go through quite a rigorous process of audit and review, and if it passes the review, you can have it shared with other people. So there's a growing number in the marketplace that simply come from developers that are generous. Now, the way that it works is the developer is going to create code, test, and package, and then optionally submit. They will use the custom visual tool, which is a free download. Microsoft have their tool and framework that I'll demonstrate quickly to you. It's versioned because when you develop and test in a version, it's locked at that version. And if Microsoft, and they do, they update how the custom visual works, it'll still side-by-side work. And there's a formal process to upgrade your visual to the newer version, test it, re-release it. When it comes to the development environment, you use the Power BI service itself. So your desktop becomes a web service that the service connects to and allows you to test your visualization with real data in the service. And I'll demo this for you too. They can be developed on Windows, Linux, Mac OS. I will be clear about this. The skill set's quite rigorous. You need JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML5, SVG, CSS. You need the whole works. But for those that are gifted with this, there's enormous opportunity. And I'm seeing that customers, a lot of major Australian customers are adopting Power BI. They love custom visuals. I won't mention the airline, but they like to see how full is the plane. They want like a thermometer with the airplane, and they want to see like the mercury growing to show how full it is. That requires developers such as yourself. So I can see that there's likely to be a nice little market out there where you might just offer this as a side service and produce those visuals. So in demo, because this is really quite involved, but there's a workshop on it tomorrow, what I'm going to do is just launch PowerShell. It's already been installed, and I know that because I can just type in PBI Viz, and we see, let's just update the font here. We see that it's been installed, and we have a variety of commands. What is required is you need to create a certificate, you need to install it, such that there's a trust established between the Power BI service, which is the environment for your testing. I've already done that. When it comes to creating a new visual, let's just do this. So, demo 3, let's just create, let's just leave it as that. I can just create PBI Viz, new demo visual. You've just created a custom visual. Go into the folder and then just launch Visual Studio Code. All the development happens in here. It truly is a framework. There's a lot involved. I've got to say it's not necessarily an easy topic. But what you'll find is that it's the Visual TS file here where all of the logic and magic happens. And essentially there's a method called update. And you're just responsible that Power BI is going to constantly call this whenever it needs to update the visual. You've just got to have your magic sitting somewhere in there. The way that it works in the service then is I can come into a dashboard like the streaming dashboard. Actually, that's the worst choice. Come into the survey. All right, and as a report, I would come into settings. Under settings, I have a developer option, and then I can enable developing a custom visual. When I return to the report and edit it, I will now see that I have the custom visual icon that I'm pointing at. And basically, I just come down to my command line here, and I say PBI Viz start. And is now hosting the visual on your desktop. Which means then in development, I could switch this card to become the custom visual. That is the update method constantly calling. The template code looks like that. You just need to fill in your aquarium or whatever. Okay, so that's an awesome framework to deliver the data visualizations of your need. Is it really 5 o'clock? Okay, I know I've got to wrap up any minute, but that's okay. Custom connectors, I'll leave it brief. There's a whole framework for building up connectors to Power BI. But really the topic of Power BI embedded analytics, the dashboards, their tiles, reports, their visuals, even that Q&A natural language experience can be embedded into your application. So if you download the slide deck, you'll learn that there are 2 approaches to embedding. They'll be talked about in the workshop tomorrow. You can embed on behalf of your own users within the tenant, or more likely for ISVs. Your application has its own authentication store. Your users of the application do not have Power BI licenses. Somehow you need to embed content and manage security for your user base. So there are 2 different embed stories. Basically embedding, SaaS embedding, because our users are current users and we're just showing them content in a different app, or PaaS embedding. We're responsible for authentication and we have licenses to embed content on their behalf. So that's the story of external versus internal app. There is an onboarding Embed tool that'll be used in the workshop tomorrow, and it allows you to fast track your first embedding. So we'll see the Embed onboarding tool here gives you those 2 paths. Is it SaaS or is it PaaS? And if it's PaaS, you'll just walk through this very simple wizard to register an app, create an app workspace, upload a Power BI desktop file or the sample that they provide you, grant permissions, which is essentially saying, yes, I agree that this app is allowed to do this, and then it will pass back to you all of the identifiers required by your app, but it doesn't finish there. If you come to the workshop tomorrow, you'll see you can download a sample app where even the config file has been updated with the values that you've just registered. So all you need to do then is put your username and password into the config file, preferably not in clear text, and then run the app, and you've got an embed happening. As an app developer, you can then easily reverse engineer the sample to understand how it worked and adapt it to your own circumstances. All right, so that's the workshop that we'll work through tomorrow. The last story is the JavaScript API. Client-side allows an enormous amount of customization and integration. Do I want to put a new filter? Do I want them to navigate to the report and filter on the customer that they're looking at? Anything that the user typically can do, you can do programmatically. All right, so it's a very interesting story, and it's bidirectional. When I click on the pie chart, tell the application what they clicked on because the app can do something in response to this. So there's a very well thought out set of methods and events that allow you to integrate in a meaningful way within your app. And I see some great examples of what-if analysis. Let's collect some data in our app, store it to a database, and then reload the Power BI report to instantly show what that data looks like. All right, so for those that ever work with embedded reporting that perhaps have developed their own over the years, you've now got a service that is designed for embedding, that is extensible, that provides superior data visualizations. All right, so the licensing we'll talk about in the workshop tomorrow. I've mentioned Power BI Premium is used for embedding, or you can use the Azure Power BI embedded resources. Typically, you'll find ISVs will work with Power BI Premium, embedded, and enterprises that are doing internal embedding will work with the Premium license. If you download the PDF of this presentation, this will give you an idea, because licensing is a little complex, as to the way Microsoft intended to apply. All right, so in conclusion, I'll wrap up rather quickly. Lots of developer opportunities to work with this amazing data visualization service. Develop exactly what you need. Real-time dashboarding with relative ease through push data sets or streaming data sets, integrating with existing Azure data services like Stream Analytics, building custom visuals and connectors, and then the strongest story of all, which is the embedding of Power BI content into your own applications. So as a reminder for tomorrow, I'm hosting 3 workshops at 9 o'clock, developing a custom visual, at 10:20, building a real-time dashboard with that API Explorer, and at 11:40, using that Embed onboarding tool to embed Power BI analytics. If you want to join me, all you need to do is bring your laptop. You probably need Visual Studio installed. If you're going to do the custom visuals, you'll need code installed. I will provide you Power BI accounts so that you can work with trial accounts, not your own. And I look forward to seeing you for those 1-hour workshops tomorrow. Otherwise, lots of resources that are follow-through material. Again, this is downloadable, and I'm going to finish on that slide right now. Even online training. And at this stage, I'll thank you for your time, attendance, and interest. Feel free to download the PDF, and look forward to seeing you in the workshops tomorrow. Thank you.